Afternoon all. I wanted to make this video in relation to a tweet that I came across, thought was interesting, and responded to. The reason this piqued my interest was due to a lot of the division in today's society. I have seen where people are splitting themselves into different camps, look on the other with suspicion, and never wish to acknowledge nor understand other points of view. The term echo chamber has become entrenched in the modern lexicon because of this division. Everyone has an opinion but never want that opinion to be challenged, not realizing that it is in the challenging of those opinions where any real understanding comes from. Those who describe themselves as on the left are happy to throw any pejoratives, such as racist or sexist, at their opponents on the basis that they are right and the other is not just wrong but evil for disagreeing. Those claiming to be on the right do exactly the same but dress it up in more flowery language and make more claims to reason despite the fact they are happy to either ignore or missing the wood for the tree. The difference between the two is where the power resides. Throughout the 1980s, the right would throw pejoratives at anyone who disagreed with them as being communists, or everything was a commie pinko plot. The difference today is that the left now have the power and are doing the same. Disagree with me and you're a Nazi, misogynist, or a conspiracy theorist. What interested me in this email exchange is the right of today believing that if we return to 1950s America then everything will be okay. If you look at the picture behind the quote, tweet, it is an idealist version of America. However, this version never existed except in people's minds or a James Dean movie. As the great MJF said,
nostalgia is a drug that causes us to misconstrue our memories, and you, my friend, are no more than nostalgia.
As an aside, that whole video is fire, and even if you are not a fan of professional wrestling, it is worth a watch. This is what I see in the reaction to the social justice movement. Most people think on it skeptically because of the inherent hypocrisy and lack of reasoned thought. The reaction of the right was just as hypocritical and lacking in reason given the history of the conservative movement. A nice quip that encapsulates their inability to see the wood for the trees was justice does not need a qualifier. I am not sure who said it, but it has no actual meaning. It is the same bumper sticker politics of the left that trans rights are human rights. In order to begin this discussion, I believe the best place to start is by defining the terms. I came across many differing views of what does and doesn't constitute modernity or traditionalism. At the base level, the dictionary definitions are rather circular. For modernity, it seems to just be considered not traditional, which makes sense because modernism, liberalism, progressivism are reactions against the status quo, in the same way that Protestantism is simply a reaction against the teachings of Catholicism. However, that is not really a satisfactory response because modernity has taken on a life of its own, as we have seen with all the things it now encompasses: LGBTQIA++, climate change, communism. If there is something to rebel against, then there is likely to be a professional protest class who will appear at any march in order to lend their voice. What I have noticed is that few of these people actually believe in the cause as they claim. They appear to be more of a rent-a-mob. I found in some discussions with people on Twitter who do not really seem interested in challenging their own bias in regard to this, only that they hold the right views and that anyone who questions their view are evil. This is very much the entrenched religiosity of any cult, and I include Christianity or any major faiths. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Richard Feynman. I found this definition in relation to modernism within art, and I think it applies more broadly to culture and society because it talks about the unfocused aspect of modernism as a rebelling against orthodoxy rather than having any fundamental beliefs, and it seems to me this is what my experiences on Twitter bear out. People just want something to rebel against rather than replacing it with an alternative. The reason I propose is because they do not have any alternative. If tradition says marriage is a legal union of a man and woman as husband and wife, then modernism must smash this and say no, we should include men and men, women and women, or any other demographic. If tradition says a man is defined as X or a woman is defined as Y, then modernism must destroy this and say no, we should include men as women and women as men. I think this would be a good time to establish a definition for traditionalism. This was similar to the modernism in having both broad and vague definitions in the dictionary. It has similar synonyms in terms of conservatism or orthodoxy and can be drilled down to the idea of this is the way we have always done things, so they should not be done any differently. This is the ultimate appeal to authority. Things have always been this way, so there is no need to change. The tribal chief is the smartest of us all, so they should always be followed. I came across an interesting and simple breakdown of what constitutes tradition and how those feed into an overarching culture. I like the statement that traditions are created at the individual level and dispensed throughout groups into a community culture, as this is generally what I see within the world. A person has a great idea. They take that to other people, it is considered, then it either becomes part of the group culture or it does not. After a while this becomes the accepted way of doing things. An analogy would be this. A tribal chief would assess what assets he has and consider how to protect his tribe against potential invaders. He would look at another nearby tribe and how they could work together to be more powerful in protecting against aggressors. Maybe he has a son, and the other tribe has a daughter, so they have them marry and have children, which protects the future of both tribes. As time has passed and tribes have become nations, the practice of horse trading as a basis for a marriage has declined. But the tradition remains and changed into a practice whereby marriage is based on commitment. Instead of a tribal chief or parental figure, now people ask the government for their blessing to marry. This highlights an important factor in the dichotomy of modernism and traditionalism. In modern times, people act as though they are separate aspects of culture, so much so that they have divided into two separate factions that believe they are the embodiment of one or the other. In my view, this schism is incorrect. They are different sides of the same coin, yin and yang. I would think of the relationship between these concepts thusly. It should not be considered a modernism versus traditionalism dichotomy, but rather a process. In times where traditions are working, there are no considerable problems. An analogy on this could be the situation of Galileo. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, due to the power of the Catholic Church, the accepted tradition was of a geocentric universe, Earth being at the center. Galileo, using the modern technology of a spyglass, having the requisite skills, built his own telescope and charted the planets, finding the tradition to be incorrect. He became a liberal, progressive, or modernist by challenging the orthodoxy. No doubt you believe he was given all sorts of wealth and honor. Of course not. He was branded a heretic and put on trial. Is this familiar? If that happened today, he would be accused of spreading misinformation. Despite being cleared of these charges, he was told not to display his working. Nowadays this would be called cancel culture. During the Inquisition, he was again arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment. Due to ill health, he was allowed house arrest. The reason for this story is this. Little has changed since Galileo's time. The irony of my next couple of examples are they show how those who claim to be modernists have actually taken up the traditionalist position of trust the science, trust the experts, trust tradition. If we take a modern example, during lockdown and the release of the COVID vaccine, numerous ideas were floated. First, masks were to be used so people could go outside. Then the possibility was raised they were not effective. It was suggested that lockdowns should be put in place. Then it came out that maybe they were not that successful in reducing infection numbers, and outside of the fact that apparently BLM protests were not superspreader events, but Trump rallies were. The use of certain drugs were highlighted as potentially useful in stopping the spread and at other times not. At times those drugs were slandered as not being effective, yet were being used in the front line of hospitals. Then came the vaccine. People were skeptical because it appeared out of nowhere, and there were concerns because it seemed rushed. Now there are suggestions of potentially fatal side effects, all of which merit further investigation. The interesting thing about this, particularly in the UK, were that the mainstream media, the supposed party of the left, Labour, and the supposed party of the right, Conservative, were in lockstep. Deny the use of masks, you want to kill grandma. Don't believe lockdowns work, you want people to die. Deny the efficacy and safety of the vaccine, you are anti-science. Don't believe what Dr. Fauci and the WHO are saying. You are an evil Nazi racist misogynist. In the US, there was a much clearer divide. MSNBC or CNN, considered mostly on the left of news, stated it categorically that Dr. Fauci was to be trusted and that anything he said was the truth. If you disagreed with him, you were denying science. I will say that Tucker Carlson, more than phone news, took on the more progressive or liberal mantle by questioning things that did not make any clear sense. He was the voice in favor of rebelling against the establishment appeals to authority. In the process, he became public enemy number one just for asking questions. Is this any different to what Galileo suffered? The whole of society turned on those with valid concerns or questions. They were deemed heretics. If that is not enough, let's take the reporting and public discourse around climate change. These were some of the discussions I had on Twitter with some people regarding the hyperbole to come from the UN, Greenpeace, and the Green movement in general. The theme here seems to be a direct appeal to authority. The data science comment is in relation to my undergraduate degree being in computer and data science rather than any type of climate science. Those who believe in the climate crisis do not take kindly to people asking questions or pointing out flaws in the work done by experts. On a larger scale, people like Michael Schellenberger and Bjorn Lomborg are vilified and branded heretics by those who claim to be rebelling against the orthodoxy, not realizing they are the orthodoxy. On a personal note, I believe wholeheartedly that we should move towards a sustainable model of electricity production and reduce our reliance on finite inputs such as coal, gas, or even uranium, but that it is currently, in my opinion, not a realistic prospect. Smarter people than I are looking into it, but research is a laborious process. It stands to reason that there will be a point of no return, but given the level of junk science by supposed expert groups like the IPCC are not helping the argument around climate change, it appears to me more plausible that they are trying to crash the economies of the world to cause mass starvation so they can reduce the population. My conclusion is this: modernism or traditionalism is not a one-size-fits-all that people fit into and will forevermore see all issues through that lens. It is a position taken by individuals on a case-by-case basis. It is a form of revolution and counter-revolution. It is not as simple as saying if we return to the 1950s America then everything will be fine. In Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, Bethesda provide nostalgia of that time period. But I also notice a little satire in their presentation to highlight that things are not always as good as you remember them. Tradition is the best we have at the time, but it eventually becomes stagnant. Then modernism comes along, says here is a better way of doing things. Tradition pushes back until the new idea becomes self-evident. Then that becomes the tradition. It is a continual process of improvement. The day it stops is the day human beings become extinct. This idea that people are beholden to a single side of the aisle, based on their political identity, is silly. I hope I have shown that people who claim to be lefty are capable of taking up the tradition baton when it suits them, just as those who claim to be on the right can equally rebel against an unjust tradition. When Pandora opened her box and released the ills of the world, there is no putting them back in, but what people forget is that at the bottom of the box was the gift of hope, so that we can deal with those ills. Thanks to all of those who watched. If you could give an upvote if you thought what I said made sense. A downvote if you think this was a complete waste of time. Add any comments regarding any aspect of the topic or my presentation skills, preferably something constructive, either positive or negative.